The smell was the first thing that told me this wasn't a game anymore. It was the smell of a barbecue gone horribly wrong, of pork left on the grill until it was nothing but black, bubbling charcoal. It filled the narrow strobe-lit corridor of the asylum ward, thick and sickening. My friend Sarah was on the floor, clutching her wrists. A thin wisp of smoke curled from between her fingers. The actor, a woman in a tattered nurse's uniform and a grimy gas mask, just stood over her head, tilted like a curious bird. The other actors, the shambling patients in straitjackets who had been moaning and lurching at us, had all gone silent. They stopped their act. Every single one of them, scattered through the room, slowly turned their heads to watch us. To watch Sarah. "Dude, what the hell?" Ben yelled, his voice cracking. "That's enough. Show's over." He took a step toward the nurse, but our guide, a gaunt man with a bored expression, put a hand on his chest, stopping him cold. "Don't," the guide said, his voice flat, devoid of any emotion. "She burned her." Chloe shrieked, pointing a trembling finger. "She's really hurt." Sarah let out a choked sob. "It hurts, Liam. Oh God, it hurts." She pulled her hand away from her wrist, and we all saw it. It wasn't a burn. Where the actor's glove had made contact, her skin was a deep, necrotic black, but it was spreading. We could see thin black veins branching out from the point of contact, crawling up her arm like spider legs under her skin. The strobe light flashed, and for a second I saw her skin bubble and shift, the blackness consuming the pale flesh. The guide didn't even look at her. He just kept his eyes on us. "She broke the rule," he said, his voice a monotone whisper that cut through the silence. "Now she has to stay. She has to become part of the show." That's when the real screaming started. Our screams, primal, gut-wrenching terror. This was the Blackwood Sanatorium, the most infamous extreme haunt in the state. People talked about it in hushed, excited tones. They said it was the most realistic, the most terrifying experience you could pay for. They boasted about its intensity, its ability to push you to your absolute limit. The waiver we signed was a novel, 5 pages of dense legal text that Ben had laughed at as he scribbled his name. "It's just to scare us. Man," he'd said, "get us in the mood." I remember the biggest, boldest line on the first page, the one plastered on signs all over the waiting area. "Do not touch the actors and do not let them touch you." We thought it was for liability, to stop people from punching a guy in a zombie mask. We were so stupid. The first few rooms had been intense but manageable. A morgue with pop-out corpses, a boiler room where a man with a prop chainsaw chased us. It was all standard high-budget horror. But the asylum ward was different. The atmosphere was heavier, the air colder. The actors here didn't just jump out, they stared, they followed. Their movements were just a little too disjointed, their silence a little too profound. We were all on edge. And Ben, in his infinite wisdom, thought it would be funny to shove Sarah forward, right into the path of the gas-masked nurse. She stumbled, her hands flying out to catch her balance. Her wrist brushed against the nurse's gloved hand. And then the smell hit. Now, that same nurse took a slow, deliberate step towards Sarah. The other patients began to converge, no longer shambling, but moving with a silent, predatory grace. We were prey. Ben grabbed Chloe's hand and my arm. "Run." We turned and bolted back the way we came, but the door we'd entered through was gone. It was just a solid, brick wall, covered in filth and old stains. No, Chloe stammered, pounding her fist against the bricks. "It was right here." The guide hadn't moved. He just watched us with those dead eyes. "There's only one way through," he said, pointing down the hall, deeper into the sanatorium. "The show must go on." We didn't have a choice. We ran. The strobe lights died, plunging us into a terrifying darkness broken only by the red glow of emergency exit signs that seemed to lead nowhere. We could hear them behind us, not footsteps, a wet, dragging sound, the sound of something heavy being pulled across the concrete floor. We rounded a corner and Ben fumbled for his phone, the flashlight beam cutting a frantic path through the darkness. It illuminated another corridor, this one lined with old, rusted cell doors. As the light passed over one of the barred windows, a pale face with wide, terrified eyes appeared for a second, a man in a regular t-shirt, not a costume. He mouthed a single word, "Help." Then something yanked him violently back into the darkness of his cell. A guttural snarl echoed down the hall. We kept running, our breath tearing at our lungs. We burst through a set of double doors into what looked like an old surgical theater. The air was thick with the smell of antiseptic and something else, something rotten. And then we heard a scream. It was Ben. He had been right behind me. But when I turned, he was gone. The double doors were swinging shut. As the gap narrowed, I saw him being dragged down the hallway by 3 of the asylum patients. They weren't taking him away. They were holding him down, and the nurse with the gas mask was slowly reaching for his face. Ben's terrified screams were cut short as the doors slammed shut, the sound echoing in the sudden, horrifying silence. It was just me and Chloe. The dragging sound started again, this time from all around us. The whispers started then, coming from the walls themselves, and they knew our names. Liam, Chloe. The voices were dry and cracked, like dead leaves skittering across pavement. They came from the vents, from the cracks in the walls, from the darkness that pooled in the corners of the surgical theater. We were trapped. The doors Ben had been dragged through wouldn't budge. They felt as solid as the brick wall before. Chloe was hyperventilating, her back pressed against the cold steel. "What do we do?" she sobbed, her voice barely a whisper. "What do we do?" There was another door, at the far end of the theater, behind the rusted operating table. It was our only chance. We crept towards it, every creak of our shoes on the grimy floor sounding like a gunshot. The door was unlocked. It opened into a maintenance corridor, a place we clearly weren't supposed to see. The walls were bare concrete, and a single, flickering fluorescent bulb cast long, dancing shadows. The air here was even colder, and the whispers were louder. This was their nest. As we moved down the hallway, we saw them, rooms, not part of the haunt, but small, grim cells. Inside one, we saw a pile of wallets, phones, and car keys. In another, a mountain of shoes, sneakers, boots, heels all piled up like refuse. This was the final stop for everyone who had ever entered and never left. On the wall, a series of papers were tacked to a corkboard. They were employee logs from the haunt, but they were old, dated from 5 years ago. I read a frantic entry scrawled in panicked handwriting. "It's not a prop. We found it in the basement when we were setting up. The old sanitarium records call it a vessel. They say it needs to be fed. It makes them. It takes people and it changes them. The touch. It's a contagion. It rewrites you." Oh God, Jerry touched one. He's changing. A contagion, a show that fed itself. My blood ran cold. This place wasn't just haunted, it was a factory. We heard a noise from a room up ahead and flattened ourselves against the wall. A low, wet, tearing sound. I risked a peek around the corner. It was a workshop. Tools lay scattered on tables, but they weren't hammers and saws. They were cruel-looking medical instruments, bone saws and strange archaic devices of leather and steel. And in the center of the room was one of the patients. It had another person, someone in street clothes, strapped to a table. It was meticulously, horribly, stitching a burlap mask onto the person's screaming face. It wasn't a costume. It was a transformation. It was a birth. We backed away, trying to stifle our screams. We had to get out. We turned and ran, blindly, desperately, down another corridor. We burst through a door and found ourselves back in the asylum ward. But it was different now. It was quiet. The strobe lights were off. A single, dim spotlight illuminated the center of the room. And standing there, waiting for us, was Sarah. Her arm was completely black now, the skin cracked and peeling like old leather. The veins had spread up her neck, crawling towards her face. Her eyes were gone, replaced by hollow, black pits, but she knew we were there. She turned her head with a sickening, jerky motion, a sound like cracking bone. "You broke the rule," she rasped, her voice a horrifying, distorted echo of what it once was. She took a step towards Chloe, her blackened hand outstretched now. "You have to stay." Chloe screamed and scrambled backwards, falling to the floor. The other figures began to emerge from the shadows, surrounding us, closing in. Their touch was the end. I looked at Sarah, at the thing that used to be my friend, and I remembered the note. The touch. It's a contagion. A desperate, insane idea sparked in my mind. The rule worked both ways. As Sarah lunged for Chloe, I did the only thing I could think of. I didn't run. I lunged forward, past Chloe, and I grabbed Sarah's other hand, my skin, against hers. For a split second, nothing happened. Then an unholy scream ripped through the air, but it wasn't from her mouth. It was a psychic shockwave that erupted in my own mind. 1,000 voices, 1,000 moments of terror from every soul this place had ever consumed, flooded my consciousness. The figures around us all seized up, their bodies spasming, their heads snapping back. The connection, the hive mind, was broken. "Go!" I screamed at Chloe, the pain in my head, blinding. She scrambled to her feet and ran for a door that had just appeared at the edge of the room, a simple wooden door marked "Exit." I ran after her, the creatures behind us beginning to stir again. We burst through, into the cool night air, into the chaotic noise of a busy parking lot. We were out. We were free. We collapsed onto the asphalt, gasping for breath, sobbing with relief. A security guard ran over. "Hey, you two okay? Did the haunt get to you?" We couldn't speak. We just pointed back at the building. The guard chuckled. "Yeah, it's a rough one. We have people running out screaming all the time." He helped us up and walked us towards my car. As I fumbled for my keys, my hand shaking, I saw her. Standing at the entrance of the haunt, under the flickering Blackwood Sanatorium sign, was a new employee, getting ready to greet the next group. She was wearing a tattered nurse's uniform and a grimy gas mask. And as she turned her head, I saw a familiar strand of blonde hair slip out from under the mask's edge. Chloe saw it too. We didn't say a word. We just got in the car and drove. Because we knew we hadn't escaped. We'd just been replaced. And we wait for the touch. Because the show must go on.